introduction, Nick. Thanks for coming out, all of you. I guess when Nick said he had this idea to do this reading, I didn't think I was actually going to be reading, so I'm not sure what I'm doing up here. But he said that Aaron was going to be in town, and he wanted to do a reading, and I thought, yeah, that'd be kind of cool because Aaron's here and stuff. So I feel like I should tell a story about Aaron, but I'm trying to think of which one. So maybe I'm trying to think if there was anyone in this workshop that I might have found. No, okay, good. I'll tell this one. Yeah. So I had this workshop with Aaron, and I think we had this idea that every time we'd submit submit more and more pages. So by the third time, I submitted 40 pages, which isn't a lot, I think, but the font was really small too, and the margins. It's doing everything I could, save the trees, So, well, and then Tom decided to do a reading on the same day because it was the last workshop, and so I only got feedback from one person in that class, and I spent about $100 on copies, but the feedback was from Aaron Francisco, and it made it worthwhile, actually. So, yeah, so there you go. If you get a chance to take a workshop with Aaron, please do. I guess that's what I'm saying. So this is something I wrote on Friday, so in the spirit of new work. And it's called Student Bodies. The reunion was held at a large chain hotel in Park City, an airy resort that had been made to look rustic, charming, woodsy even, exposed knotty pine for the beams. An engineer, Hal, could admire the place even as he began to second-guess why exactly he'd come. And he practically turned around and left when he saw an old black-and-white photograph of Sherry, hair teased high as a rat's nest, grinning, wearing way too much makeup. Her picture frame sat on a solitary table covered in a black tablecloth at the back end of the reception hall. In memoriam, it had said. And nearby there were pictures of 4 other classmates whom he vaguely remembered. Tony Espinoza, dressed in a tux, beaming that eternal smile of youth. He felt his stomach tighten. What had happened to Tony? Car crash, he suddenly remembered. His mother had told him about it. It was just a year after graduation, coming down Immigration Canyon with a little too much speed. And next to Tony, a picture of Sandra Chase, the short cheerleader who'd always bothered him, a good and bad kind of bother. Bulimic, he remembered, had starved herself to death, or that was the rumor around school back then. She hadn't even walked, chose instead to ingest too much baking soda, and her stomach popped. He'd once entertained such ghoulish stories about it from Sherry, the lengths these girls had gone to back then in order to be perfect. And now, after so much time had passed, he couldn't even remember what it was about Sandra he hadn't liked, or why they weren't better friends. She looked beautiful behind the glass. They'd all been so young, he realized, afraid of the wrong things, it turned out, afraid of all the things that wouldn't kill them, and the way everything had changed, no one told them about that. No one had predicted any of it. Hal thought it was kind of odd that they'd never once stopped to consider just how amazing and accidental everything had been, how much like a gift and completely undeserved. They'd been unworthy, weren't even conscious of it most of the time, and now his hair was gone, most of it. He'd put on 20 pounds, maybe more, and hated to think about it. And of course Sherry was gone too. That was the main thing. He wasn't sure how he'd made it 8 years without her. How? He felt a light tap on his back and turned around to see a woman he at first didn't recognize. Looking down at her tag, he said, "Julie? Oh my God." The two hugged like old friends and then held each other's forearms. Wow. Was this surreal or what? Julie said. "You look good, Julie." And she did. She'd filled out, but in a good way, no longer rail thin. And her hair was better now, and her breasts. Had she even had breasts in high school? He couldn't remember them, not like these anyway. "Hal Anderson, are you staring at my chest?" Julie laughed. I guess some things never change. He felt his cheeks warm. Sherry had always said he was a breast man, that once hers were gone, he'd miss them more than anything, that he might even leave her for another woman. A week before her surgery, she surprised him, answering the door topless, and when he looked at them, the perfect upward lilt of them, the dark areoles and nipples becoming erect, he couldn't see the cancer. "Close the door," she said. "It's cold out there." "I can see that." Hal laughed, and once the door was closed, she wrapped herself around him and pressed her lips into his neck. "I'm sorry to hear about Sherry," Julie said. "I'm sorry." "She was a special woman," Hal said. "What about you? Do you ever get married?" Julie shook her head. "I guess I just never found Mr. Right." "I find that hard to believe." "Or Ms. Right." Julie smiled. "I suppose you ruined me, Hal." It was hard for him to tell whether or not she was joking. He couldn't remember ever dating her, but it was a long time ago. Maybe there'd been some drinking, an accident, though surely he would have remembered. This was Julie Smith, after all, a girl who'd grown up on the same street. As the night wore on, they drank and danced, old songs from the 80s, and in the halcyon haze of alcohol, he almost felt like he and Julie were back in high school again. Maybe that was the point. The buzz on the floor felt good, and he knew he'd pay for it in the morning, but not now, no. He didn't want to overthink anything. That had been the problem with high school. Now he was just happy to be here, happy seeing Julie. My God, Julie Smith, and she still had all the right moves, even though he still couldn't remember what they'd done or not done or when or where. It was enough just to be out there shaking it, feeling his body move. He felt a kind of erotic twinge just thinking about it all, able now to look from a distance, older, smarter now. He had money and a BMW and respect. As Kaja Gugu continued playing, she took hold of his hands. It was far too easy to kid himself into thinking their whole lives had been leading up to this very moment. Next, a slow jam, and they leaned into each other drunkenly, and Julie remembered, and Julie whispered, "Let's get out of here, Hal Anderson. Aren't we a little too old for this?" Julie fixed him with a frown, crooked her neck to the side. It made an awful sound, but he chose to ignore it. "It's not like we're sneaking behind the bleachers anymore," she said. "I've got 2 children," he told her, but he struggled to say their names and figured she wouldn't remember them anyway. "Sherry's? No, my second wife. I didn't realize you'd remarried. It didn't last." "Oh, sorry. You sound unhappy, Hal Anderson." He must have looked like one of those lost puppies at the pound, a little ragged around the edges, and if the mood didn't lift soon, he'd need something stronger than alcohol. "It's great seeing you." "Poor sweetie," she said. "It looks to me like you need some cheering up." She squeezed his hand and pulled, and she didn't have to pull long to lead him out of the ballroom. In the elevator, they leaned into each other. He could smell the wine on her breath. It was sweet, better than any of the hooch they'd drunk in high school. "Which floor?" he asked. "Wherever you want to take me," she said. And for reasons he could not explain, he pressed all the buttons, something he hadn't done since he was a kid. And she was just drunk enough to find it funny rather than annoying. They both started laughing. Then a man entered the elevator, very serious, left in a huff when he saw they were taking the slow way up. The doors closed. The elevator began to rise. And then it opened again. And then it closed again. And after a few floors, they weren't even paying attention anymore. They were kissing, her hands around his generous middle and his on both of her breasts. They didn't feel real. His head was spinning. The elevator smelled like sex. And as they rode upward, they began to peel off their clothes. If it had been a tower, they might have been naked by the time they'd reached the top. But no. The doors opened. A bell chimed. And this time they stayed open. Someone entered, apologized, and laughed as she pulled down her skirt and reached for her pumps. She followed him off the elevator. "Where are we?" she squealed. "Shh," he said, "quiet." She was giggly. They both were, and hands clasped. They moved, not sure where they'd end up, but a light at the end of the hall, a window. Hal wasn't even certain this was his floor, but he could see the reflection. even at a distance, the direct light above them in the hall, each of their bodies reflected back at him, and beyond the glass, faraway lights, as if the mountain were on fire. He admired their reflections as if they were meeting their former selves, these people they'd once been, but had long since forgotten about. And it was here Hal finally remembered, even though it caused his head to hurt, even though his eyes scrunched and his finger went up to his temple. "What is it?" Julie asked. She looked concerned. He knew better than to spoil the mood, so he smiled, whole time remembering her, the old neighborhood, how she used to follow him home after school, or he'd follow her. Just an adolescent game of cat and mouse. That's all it was. It went on for years. Then one day she pulled him under the bridge. She wore braces then, big metal bands on her top and bottom teeth. They gave her a mysterious pout. She was cute, but for the bridge work. But he wanted to be a good sport. Everything had been leading them here, so he kissed her, and she kissed him, but they didn't get very far before a noise under the bridge startled them. A shrill and awful sound made all the worse as it echoed through the reinforced concrete. A drunk, maybe, or an ogre. Hal's heart went in his chest. He jumped up and ran and didn't even think of her, didn't look back until he was a good 50 yards away, and when he finally turned, saw she was following from a distance, cool, hands full of books he hadn't seen before. She wouldn't look at him. She must have thought he was a coward, and maybe he was. Looking out the window, they stood there a long time, hands on cool glass, just seeing the world, yellow casts of lamps, warm exhaust of cars going in and out of the parking lot below, until Hal was sober enough to realize how preposterous it was, what they were doing, what they were about to do, how old they'd become, and in such a short period of time. Was it only yesterday they were student bodies? And now, look at them. "What do you do for a living?" he suddenly asked. She laughed, a short, breathy whistle. "I'm a lawyer," she said. "Corporate?" "Non-profit." "You?" "An engineer." "Did you stay in Salt Lake?" "No, I live in Washington now," he said. "Me too, just out of Seattle." She reached out to squeeze his hand. "Oh," he said. "What?" "I live in D.C." They shared an awkward smile, then laughed anew at the absurdity of the situation. How unlikely their circumstances were to make this anything more than a single night. But they were also both in a place where a night, especially one as unexpected as this, would have to do. Thank you.